Do you mind giving a little overview of the different type of attachment styles and what causes them?
Sure, absolutely. So the first one that we talk about is anxious attachment. And so anxious this is the individual who sends multiple texts in a row, who is constantly seeking out reassurance. They often get categorized as maybe like needy or insecure, and that they are the ones who are just constantly seeking out that attention, seeking out the reassurance. And that often comes from when we think about upbringing and we think about maybe a parent who was inconsistent. Maybe they were available sometimes and at other times they were wrapped up in their own stuff. And so the child was exposed, they got some nurturing, but then at other times they didn't. And so that inconsistency creates an anxiety within that child of, how do I get them to pay attention to me? Because I know what it feels like when I get attention. So how do I get that attention? Same into the adult relationships. With the avoidant, this individual is the one, they are described as having walls, or they're guarded. They're more aloof to things. And often where that comes from is in upbringing. If a parent maybe was not as emotionally available, physically or emotionally available, and so if they spent more time alone, or if they figured out that when they're feeling upset, they felt safer being alone, then that creates some of that avoidance. By the look on your face, I can see that, yes.
That's me.
Exactly. And then the disorganized or the anxious avoidant, this is a combination of the both. This is really hard to be in relationship with somebody who is disorganized, because they are the come here, no go away type person, meaning they pull you closer and closer. And if you get too close, they're like, and go away, I'm done with you. And that constant push and pull is really confusing, obviously for the partner, but even for the individual who's dealing with that, because they don't know what is going to help them to feel safe. And that type of individual often grew up in a more chaotic household. So there might have been abuse, addiction. There was a lack of safety in their upbringing. And so they don't know how to feel safe as an adult. And so they're constantly just trying to figure it out, which creates some of this chaos for them. And then the fourth being secure. And that is, they're cooperative, they're agreeable, they're flexible. They're not perfect. We have to really, nail that in, that they're not perfect, but they're self-aware and they're cooperative. What I cringe so much when we see on social media, people talk about, oh God, of course it's about the childhood, or therapists even say, well, let's leave the childhood out of it. Let's focus on the future. That's not a thing, because our childhood is our programming. And so when I'm talking about this topic, I use the term relational programming. And so truly, I have a horrible computer analogy that I've been made fun of far too many times by friends of mine, so I will not use that. But basically the idea is with, a computer, the output is a reflection of the input, I think, something along those lines. And so that's what happens to us in childhood. The way that we are programmed, the way we're programmed to be in a relationship, to handle disappointment, to communicate, to resolve conflict, all of that happens early on. And if we don't understand where it's coming from, we're just putting a Band-Aid over the issue. We're not actually resolving it. And so that is one of my most cringing things when people say, why can't we just leave the childhood out of it? Because that's you. That's how you were designed.
Right. It's your foundation.
Yes.
You can't leave the foundation out of a house that you're building. And I do think there's like space where it's like there's these little areas as an adult where you can behave a little bit better and stuff like that, and tweaks around the edges. But to your point, it's almost like a Band-Aid, because then once you're thrust back in and you're in that environment where you're triggered to go back to how you learned how to behave as a child, then ultimately those tweaks around the edges don't work. And they were just a Band-Aid that fell off, and then you have a scab that just opened and you're back where you started.
Right. And the other piece of this, and the other piece of why we dig into the childhood, is because we have to address the traumas of our childhood. All of us have experienced trauma, and more of the present day research is talking more about, it's not only if you were raised in an abusive household or severe physical neglect. So it's not only the things that happened to us, but it's also the good things that didn't happen to us. So if we weren't nurtured, if we weren't emotionally attended to in the way that we needed, that is a trauma. And that has to be resolved. We have to heal from that if we want any chance of behaving differently in the future.
That's really, really, really important.